The stupid office lights hummed at a frequency that made my temples ache. My manager, Leonard Crane, sat at the head of the table with his fingers steepled, wearing that expression I'd learned to read over 3 years, the one that said he'd already made a decision and was simply performing the theater of consultation. "Rihanna, we're making a change to the Stellar Wind proposal," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Vanessa Co. will be taking over the client presentation. 3 weeks of work. 87 pages of technical specifications. Every compliance requirement mapped to their operational framework. Every risk assessment calibrated to their exact threshold tolerances." "She pitches better than you," Leonard added, with something approaching a smirk. I didn't argue. There was no point. I simply gathered my notepad, stood, and walked out of that conference room with its burnt coffee smell and its humming lights. The decision was made. The theater was over. What Leonard didn't understand, what he couldn't understand, given how little he actually read beyond executive summaries, was what my role at Graphite Technologies actually entailed. I wasn't just a proposal writer. I wasn't just a technical consultant. I was the only ISO 27001 lead implementer certified employee in our division. I was the only person whose signature could validate our compliance frameworks for enterprise clients. And more specifically, I was the only authorized signatory on our security attestation documents for the telecommunications sector. This certification wasn't decorative. It was structural. It was load-bearing. Every proposal we submitted to telecommunications companies required a compliance attestation signed by a certified lead implementer. Without that signature, the proposal wasn't just incomplete, it was invalid. It couldn't be evaluated. It couldn't be scored. It couldn't proceed to contract negotiation. The certification wasn't transferable. It wasn't something Leonard could reassign along with presentation duties. It lived with me, personally, through 2 years of training, examination, and continuous professional development requirements. I'd explained this once, during my onboarding. I'd documented it in my role description. I'd even sent a memo last year when the company tried to restructure our compliance team. But Leonard had a habit of skimming documents, nodding along, and then proceeding as though details were optional. That night, I sat in my small apartment with its single window overlooking the parking lot. I opened my laptop and logged into the International Certification Registry. I searched for Graphite Technologies, filtered by active telecommunications attestation authorities. One result appeared. My name. My certification number. My authority. I searched for Vanessa Co. Marketing specialist. Excellent presenter. No compliance certifications. No signing authority. No legal standing to validate a telecommunications security framework. I closed the laptop. I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt something colder. Something more precise. The Stellar Wind presentation was scheduled for Monday morning, 9 o'clock sharp. Today was Thursday. That gave them 4 days to realize what they'd done. I didn't call Leonard. I didn't send an email. I simply waited. Friday passed quietly. I worked on other projects, smaller accounts, internal documentation, the routine maintenance of our certification records. I ate lunch at my desk. I left at 5:30. Nobody contacted me about Stellar Wind. Saturday, I went grocery shopping. I cleaned my apartment. I read a book. My phone stayed silent. Sunday evening, I received a text from Vanessa. "Hey, quick Q, where's the compliance attestation form for Stellar Wind? Can't find it in the shared drive." I responded after 20 minutes. Long enough to finish my tea. That's generated from the certification portal. Needs lead implementer credentials. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Can you send me yours? Credentials aren't transferable. Registry flagged me for audit last month, so I'm being extra careful with access protocols. The 3 dots stayed for a full minute, then vanished. No response. Monday morning arrived. I didn't go into the office. I'd taken a personal day, requested it Friday afternoon, approved automatically by the HR system. Instead, I sat in a coffee shop across the street from our building, the kind with large windows that offered a clear view of our third-floor conference room. At 8:45, I saw Vanessa enter the conference room. She wore a navy blazer and carried a leather portfolio. Leonard stood beside her, gesturing animatedly. Two people I didn't recognize, Stellar Wind executives, presumably, sat on the far side of the table. The presentation began at 9 o'clock sharp. I could see Vanessa's gestures, confident and practiced. She was good at this part. She had the charisma Leonard valued, the polish that photographed well in client meetings and quarterly reviews. 20 minutes in, one of the Stellar Wind executives, a woman with steel gray hair pulled into a tight bun, raised her hand. The room went still. I watched Vanessa pause mid-gesture. The executive said something. Vanessa responded. The executive shook her head and pulled out a document. From my angle, I couldn't read the specific words, but I recognized the form. It was the RFP compliance checklist. Section 7, Mandatory Certifications and Attestations. The executive pointed at a specific line. Vanessa flipped through her portfolio. Leonard leaned over, scanning the pages. The searching became more frantic. Papers scattered across the table. Leonard pulled out his phone. My phone buzzed. Leonard's name on the screen. I declined the call and took a sip of coffee. The executive stood. She gathered her materials with mechanical precision, every movement deliberate. The second Stellar Wind representative followed suit. They shook hands with Leonard and Vanessa, brief, formal, conclusory, and walked out. Through the window, I watched Leonard's face cycle through confusion, then realization, then something approaching panic. He was shouting now. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read the body language. Vanessa stood frozen, still holding her portfolio. My phone buzzed again. Leonard. Then a text from Vanessa. Then an email from our division director, Chloe Winters, marked urgent. I finished my coffee slowly. I ordered a second one. I opened my laptop and checked the certification registry again, confirming what I already knew. At 10:30, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I answered. Rihanna Jasons? A crisp, professional voice. Female. This is Helen Ashworth from Stellar Wind Communications. I'm trying to understand a discrepancy in your company's proposal submission. Of course. How can I help? Your RFP response lists you as the lead implementer and attestation authority, but you weren't present at this morning's presentation. The individual who presented the proposal, a Ms. Coe, doesn't appear in our certification verification system. Can you clarify your role in this submission? I chose my words carefully. Precisely. I developed the technical framework and compliance architecture for the proposal. However, I was removed from the client-facing presentation duties last week. My certification and signing authority weren't transferred because they're non-transferable by regulatory design. A pause. I heard papers rustling. So the attestation documents in your submitted proposal, who signed those? I haven't signed any Stellar Wind attestation documents. I was removed from the project before completing that phase of the submission process. Another pause, longer this time. Ms. Jasons, are you saying that your company submitted a telecommunications infrastructure proposal without valid compliance attestation? I'm saying I wasn't in a position to validate the submission after my removal from the project. Whether the proposal included invalid attestation documents or simply omitted them entirely, I can't speak to. I wasn't involved in the final submission. I see. Her tone shifted, becoming colder. More formal. We'll need to discuss this with your leadership. This is a material compliance failure. Under our vendor policy, this invalidates not just this proposal but potentially your company's eligibility for future telecommunications contracts until the underlying authority structure is rectified. I understand. I'm available to discuss the technical details if that would be helpful. It would. Can you come to our offices this afternoon? 2 o'clock? I'll be there. The call ended. I closed my laptop and paid for my coffee. The barista smiled at me, wished me a good day. I walked back to my apartment, changed into a charcoal suit, and pulled out the folder I'd prepared over the weekend. Inside, every email documenting my role as the sole certified authority. Every memo explaining the non-transferability of attestation rights. Every piece of correspondence showing I'd attempted to flag this structural dependency to leadership. I also included the project timeline for Stellar Wind, showing which decisions and approvals I'd made during the development phase. Each approval had conditions attached, valid pending continued authority oversight by designated lead implementer. Standard language. Protective language. The kind of language that made it clear when something stopped being valid. At 1:45, I arrived at StellarWinds headquarters. The building was glass and steel, modern, efficient. The lobby smelled like furniture polish and ambition. I checked in with reception. Helen Ashworth came down to meet me personally. She was exactly as I'd imagined from her voice, mid-50s, gray suit, eyes that calculated 3 moves ahead. We shook hands. "Thank you for coming on short notice," she said. "We have some questions about the structural integrity of your company's compliance program." She led me to a conference room on the 7th floor. 2 other people waited inside, a man introduced as their general counsel, and a woman identified as their chief information security officer. For the next 90 minutes, I walked them through the technical architecture of the proposal. I explained each decision point, each risk assessment, each compliance control mapped to their operational environment. I showed them the timeline of when each approval was made, and the conditions attached to each approval. Then I showed them the key document, the certification registry entry showing that my authority had conditions attached. Conditions that required active employment in a designated role. Conditions that, upon my removal from the project, effectively expired. "So every approval you made for this proposal," the general counsel said slowly, "became invalid the moment you were removed from oversight?" "Not immediately," I corrected. "There's typically a grace period for transition and knowledge transfer. But without a designated successor or formal handoff, and given the presentation occurred outside that grace period, yes. The approvals couldn't be maintained without the underlying authority structure." The CISO leaned back in her chair. "Your leadership knows this?" I documented the structure multiple times. Whether they read those documents. I let the sentence hang. Helen Ashworth tapped her pen against the table. "Ms. Jasons, let me be direct. We're interested in Graphite Technologies' capabilities. Your proposal was technically superior to the alternatives. But we can't proceed without confidence in your compliance governance." "What would it take to restore that confidence?" "You'd need a certified lead implementer with active oversight authority over the telecommunications portfolio." "Which is you." "Currently, yes. But you're not on the project anymore." "Currently, no." She exchanged glances with her colleagues. "If you were reinstated, with appropriate authority to ensure this doesn't happen again, could you validate the proposal framework within our evaluation window?" I'd prepared for this question. I'd need to conduct a full re-review of the submission to ensure nothing was altered during my absence. Then yes, I could provide attestation. But I wouldn't do this as an employee in my previous role. "What would you need?" "Independent contractor status. Fixed-term engagement with defined scope. Technical authority over compliance matters without executive override. And a rate structure reflecting the specialized nature of the certification." The general counsel wrote something on his notepad. Helen nodded slowly. "We'll need to discuss this with your leadership," she said. "But I want to be clear, our continued interest in this contract is conditional on your involvement. We're not interested in working with a company that doesn't understand its own authority structures." I left the meeting at 4 o'clock. By 4:30, my phone started ringing. Leonard. Chloe Winters. The division VP, Raymond Cole. I let them all go to voicemail. At 6 o'clock, I received an email from Raymond Cole requesting an immediate meeting. I responded with my availability, tomorrow at 10, in a neutral conference room, with legal counsel present. The meeting happened exactly as I specified. I arrived with a printed document, my terms of engagement. 1 page, bulleted, clear. Raymond sat across from me, Leonard beside him, looking diminished. The company's outside counsel, a sharp-eyed woman named Catherine Monroe, sat at the end of the table. "Rihanna," Raymond began, "we need to discuss the StellarWinds situation. I spoke with their team yesterday. They've outlined their requirements for moving forward." "Yes. They want you on the project. Exclusively. They want validated compliance oversight. I can provide that, under specific conditions." I slid the document across the table. Raymond picked it up. His eyes scanned the bullets. "Independent contractor status," he read aloud. 6-month term. Authority over all compliance attestations without executive override. Selection of third-party auditors for governance validation. Rate of. He paused. This is 3 times your current salary. This is market rate for specialized certification services. I checked. Leonard looked like he wanted to say something. Catherine Monroe put a hand on his arm, stopping him. You're asking for complete autonomy, Raymond said. I'm asking for the authority structure that should have been in place from the beginning. The structure I documented multiple times. The structure that, if it had been respected, would have prevented this situation entirely. Catherine Monroe leaned forward. The third-party auditor requirement, why is that necessary? Because I need protection against exactly what just happened. If I'm going to certify compliance frameworks, I need assurance that executive decisions won't undermine those frameworks without proper review. Independent audit provides that assurance. And the no override clause? Compliance isn't negotiable. If leadership disagrees with a compliance determination, they can seek external review through the auditor. But they can't simply overrule certified decisions because they're inconvenient. Raymond set down the document. This is a significant change to our operational structure. It's a formalization of the authority structure that already existed. The structure you relied on when you needed it, and ignored when it was inconvenient. Silence filled the room. Leonard stared at the table. Raymond exchanged a long look with Catherine Monroe. If we don't agree to these terms, Raymond asked, what happens? Stellar Wind walks. Your telecommunications portfolio becomes unserviceable. Every active client in that sector needs recertification within 90 days, and you have no authorized signatory. You'll need to hire and train a replacement, which takes minimum 18 months. During that time, you'll lose every major account in the sector. You'd let that happen? It's not about what I'd let happen. It's about structural reality. You created a single point of failure, then removed that point. These are the consequences of that decision. Catherine Monroe picked up the document again. I need to review this properly. Give me 24 hours. I stood. You have until Thursday. Stellar Wind's evaluation window closes Friday. After that, you'll need to resubmit entirely, which puts you at least 3 months behind your competitors. I left the building and went back to my apartment. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired, and strangely hollow. This wasn't how systems were supposed to work. But systems only worked when people respected their design. Wednesday afternoon, I received a call from Catherine Monroe. We're prepared to accept your terms with 2 modifications, she said. The engagement period is 9 months instead of 6, and we want right of first refusal on contract renewal. Agreeable, provided renewal terms are renegotiated at market rate. Done. I'll send the contract by end of day. The paperwork arrived at 5 o'clock. I read every clause, made 3 small revisions, and returned it signed. On Thursday morning, I walked into Stellar Wind's offices and provided formal attestation for the proposal. Helen Ashworth watched me sign each document, my certification seal pressed into the paper beside my signature. Your company is lucky to have you, she said. My company is lucky I'm willing to maintain their compliance structure despite their best efforts to undermine it. She smiled, sharp and knowing. You're not doing this for them. No. I'm doing this because the system deserves to work properly. The companies that rely on these certifications deserve to know they're real. That's not about loyalty to Graphite Technologies. That's about professional integrity. The following week, Graphite Technologies issued a press release announcing the successful Stellar Wind contract. It mentioned strengthened compliance oversight and enhanced governance structures. It didn't mention me by name, though the internal communications department asked for a photo for their newsletter. I declined. The real changes happened quietly, in documentation most people would never read. First, there was the governance framework document. Catherine Monroe and I spent 2 full days drafting it, line by line. She understood what I was building, not just protection for me, but a template that could survive beyond any individual person. The document established clear boundaries. Technical compliance decisions required certification-backed authority. Executive leadership could request external review through the designated auditor, but couldn't override determinations unilaterally. The auditor selection process took another week. I reviewed proposals from 5 different firms. Raymond wanted the cheapest option, a boutique consultancy that promised flexible interpretations of compliance standards. I rejected them immediately. The firm I selected, Cornerstone Assurance Partners, had a reputation for rigid adherence to regulatory frameworks. They were expensive. They were uncompromising. They were exactly what the system needed. During the second week of my new engagement, I discovered the extent of the problem Leonard had created. It wasn't just stellar wind. It was everything. I spent 3 days reviewing our active client portfolio. 18 telecommunications contracts. 12 required annual compliance recertification. 7 were operating on attestations I'd signed months ago, before my removal, that were technically still valid but approaching their renewal windows. 3 had lapsed entirely during the chaos of the previous weeks. I called a meeting with Raymond and our legal team. I brought printed spreadsheets, color-coded by urgency level. Red for immediate crisis. Yellow for approaching deadline. Green for stable. The spreadsheet was mostly red and yellow. This is every active telecommunications client, I said, sliding the document across the conference table. These dates show when their compliance attestations expire. These columns show whether we have the documentation to support renewal. Raymond's face went pale as he scanned the rows. How many are we at risk of losing? Without immediate intervention? 11. With proper prioritization and remediation work, we can probably save 9. Probably? 2 of these clients have documentation gaps that predate my involvement. Someone approved security controls without proper validation. I can't certify something that was never properly implemented. They'll need actual remediation work, not just paperwork. Catherine Monroe leaned forward, studying the spreadsheet. What's the timeline for the critical ones? 4 clients have attestations expiring within 30 days. I need access to their current infrastructure documentation, recent audit reports, and any change logs from the past 6 months. If everything checks out, I can recertify. If there are problems, we need to decide quickly whether to fix them or let the contracts lapse. Leonard, who'd been sitting silently at the far end of the table, finally spoke. Can't we just extend the old certifications? Buy ourselves time? I looked at him directly for the first time since the meeting started. No. That would be fraud. These are legal attestations. They're not marketing materials you can stretch when convenient. His face flushed red, but he didn't respond. Raymond cleared his throat. What do you need? Full access to all client documentation. Direct communication with their technical teams, no filters through account managers. And I need Leonard's team to stop making promises about compliance timelines without checking with me first. Done. What else? I need to hire someone. Not another certified lead implementer, that takes years. But someone who can handle the documentation review and preliminary assessments. Someone detail-oriented who understands that this work matters. You have budget approval for 1 full-time position. Find who you need. I posted the job listing that afternoon. Not on the usual recruitment sites where Graphite Technologies typically advertised, but on specialized compliance and certification forums. I wrote the description myself, emphasizing the nature of the work, meticulous, sometimes tedious, absolutely critical. No room for shortcuts or approximations. I received 43 applications. I interviewed 7 candidates. I hired one. Her name was Sophia Chen. 26 years old, fresh from a master's program in information security governance. She'd spent her thesis year studying the systemic failures that led to major compliance breakdowns. She understood, instinctively, what I'd learned through hard experience, that details weren't bureaucratic overhead, they were the foundation that kept everything from collapsing. Why did you leave your last job? I asked during her final interview. They wanted me to sign off on a security assessment I hadn't actually completed. Said the client was demanding it and we couldn't afford delays. I refused. They suggested I was being inflexible. And I quit. I'm not interested in building a career on compromised standards. I hired her on the spot. Sophia started the following Monday. I gave her the yellow-coded files first, the clients approaching their deadline but still manageable. I walked her through the documentation review process, showing her what to look for, gaps in change logs, inconsistencies between reported controls and audit evidence, vague language that suggested someone didn't actually understand what they'd implemented. She caught on to the patterns faster than I'd expected. By the end of her first week, she'd flagged 3 issues I'd missed in my initial review. This client claims they're running encrypted backups to an off-site facility, she said, pointing at a line in a security assessment. But their change log shows they migrated to cloud storage 4 months ago. Nobody updated the documentation. Good catch. That's a material discrepancy. Flag it for remediation before I certify anything. She nodded, making notes in the margin. How often does this happen? People just not updating critical documentation? Constantly. They think of it as paperwork. They don't realize that in a compliance framework, the documentation isn't a representation of reality, it is the reality. If it's not documented correctly, it doesn't exist from a certification standpoint. She looked up at me, something like recognition in her expression. That's why you wouldn't sign off on Stellarwind when they removed you from the project. That's exactly why. Over the next month, we worked through the critical client files systematically. Some were straightforward recertifications, everything documented properly, controls implemented as specified, easy to validate. Others required extensive remediation. 2 clients needed emergency infrastructure changes to meet current standards. 1 required a complete security architecture redesign. And 2 clients, as I predicted, couldn't be saved. The documentation gaps were too severe, the implementation too far from what had been certified. I met with their account teams and explained the situation clearly. We could not ethically recertify their current state. They could either invest in proper remediation, which would take months, or they could seek services from another provider. Both clients left. The account managers were furious. Raymond was disappointed but resigned. Catherine Monroe supported my decision entirely. Short-term revenue loss, she said when Raymond questioned whether we'd been too rigid, versus long-term regulatory exposure and reputational damage. This was the right call. Leonard, meanwhile, had become almost invisible. He still held his title, still appeared on the organizational chart, but his actual authority had evaporated. Compliance decisions went through me. Client presentations required my review before delivery. His team learned quickly to check with Sophia before making any promises about certification timelines. I saw him once in the break room, standing by the coffee machine, a new one, I noticed, that didn't burn the coffee. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. When he saw me, he turned and left without pouring his cup. I didn't feel satisfaction at his reduced state. I felt nothing in particular. He'd made decisions without understanding their implications. Now he lived with the consequences. That was simply how systems worked. But if you check the Public Telecommunications Certification Registry, you'll find an interesting entry. Under Graphite Technologies authorized signatories, there's now a note, Independent Compliance Authority, see Governance Framework document for oversight protocols. And if you read that governance framework, publicly filed, as required by industry standards, you'll find a structure where technical authority operates independently from executive discretion. Where compliance decisions are reviewed by neutral auditors, not overruled by managers who don't understand the underlying systems. A structure where the person who signs the documents also has the power to protect what those signatures mean. I ran into Vanessa in the hallway about 3 weeks later. She'd been reassigned to a different account, something in retail logistics. She looked uncomfortable when she saw me. "Rihanna," she said. I wanted to say. I didn't know. About the certification stuff. Leonard said it was just about presentation skills. I know. He really screwed this up. He screwed up understanding the system. The system itself works fine when people respect it. She nodded slowly. People are saying you saved the division. I didn't save the division. I maintained the integrity of the certification framework. If that happened to save the division as a side effect, that's because the division's survival depends on that framework. They just didn't realize it until they tried to operate without it. She hesitated, then asked, "Are you ever coming back? To a regular employee role, I mean?" "No. This structure works better. Clearer boundaries. Less room for confusion about authority and responsibility. Don't you miss it? Being part of the team?" I considered the question. The old break room conversations. The casual Friday lunches. The sense of being embedded in something larger than myself. I miss the illusion that we were all working toward the same goals, I said. But it was always an illusion. Management's goal was revenue and growth at whatever cost. My goal was maintaining systems that actually functioned. Those goals conflicted more often than they aligned. Vanessa looked like she wanted to say something else, but couldn't find the words. Finally, she just nodded and continued down the hallway. I walked past her toward the elevator. My laptop bag felt heavier than usual, full of documentation, audit reports, compliance frameworks that needed review. The work that actually mattered. The work that couldn't be reassigned on a whim, because it was built on knowledge and certification and years of careful attention to detail. The elevator doors opened. Inside stood a young woman I didn't recognize, wearing a visitor badge. She held a folder marked with the Cornerstone Assurance Partners logo. "Are you Rihanna Jasons?" she asked. "Yes. I'm Nina Wolf, junior auditor with Cornerstone," she said. "Quarterly governance review. Do you have time now, or should I book something formal?" I checked the clock, 11:15. "Now works. Conference room B." We rode down in silence. In the room, she organized her materials with meticulous precision. "This is my first governance framework review," she admitted. "I've done technical audits, but never one of these independent authority structures." "It's unusual because it has to be," I said. "Once you understand the history, you'll see why." "I read the Stellarwind report." She looked up. That must have been satisfying, proving them wrong. It wasn't about satisfaction. Systems either function or they don't. She scribbled a note. "Your assistant says you've declined 2 clients over compliance gaps. Leadership okay with the revenue loss?" "Not thrilled. But better than the penalties we'd face if a certified decision later failed. Council has made that clear." "And you have full technical authority? No executive override?" "That's what you're here to confirm." For 3 days she interviewed everyone: Raymond, Catherine, Leonard, Sophia, reviewing logs, emails, minutes. On Friday she presented her findings. "The framework works as designed," she said. "No executive interference. Documentation is strong. But you have a single point of authority. If Ms. Jasons became unavailable, you'd face the same crisis that created this structure." "I'm training Sophia," I said. 2-year runway. All decisions are fully documented." "Test it," Nina said. "Have her run a certification using only your notes. You'll see the gaps." It was a good recommendation. In the weeks that followed, my days shifted: documentation in the morning, training Sophia in the afternoon, consulting at night. Leonard avoided me. The org chart still kept me outside the hierarchy, a floating box with dotted lines. Fine by me. I'd learned where real power lived, in the person whose signature makes things valid, whose knowledge can't be substituted, whose absence exposes every weakness in the system. In my small second-floor office, beneath my ISO 27001 certificate, not for pride but for precision, I understood something everyone else was finally learning too. Authority isn't granted. It's earned, documented, and undeniable.